Welcome to the RLH Project's podcast, Love Matters, where we talk about real academic research mixed with real life experiences to hopefully improve the real relationships you have with important people in your life. I'm the founder of the RLH Project and the host of the Love Matters podcast, Dr. Jenny Rosier. I'm also an associate professor of communication studies at James Madison University, a wife to my favorite person on the planet, a mother of 4 young children, and an all-around love enthusiast. As an expert in romantic and parent-child relationships, I've dedicated my life to figuring out how individuals can use communication to live happy, healthy lives connected to other people. I hope that this podcast can help you. Hello, friends! This is the first season of the RLH Project's podcast, Love Matters. For season 1, I've decided to do an in-depth 12-episode explanation of a single concept that impacts us all, attachment. I actually teach a class at James Madison University in the School of Communication Studies called Attachment Communication. And much of this season's podcast is based on my lectures from that class. And so that's the plan for season 1 of the Love Matters podcast, an in-depth 12-episode explanation of the science of attachment, with relevant stories from myself and a ton of cool people I know sprinkled throughout. Lucky for you, I'm not just offering a podcast to help you understand attachment. I've also created a 60-page digital workbook that you can purchase through the link in my Instagram bio at Relationships Love Happiness or on my website, www.relationshipslovehappiness.com. This digital workbook not only complements the podcast, but it also includes extra attachment tips and information not covered in the podcast, and includes self-reflection prompts throughout that will encourage you to dig deep and reflect on your own past and current life experiences. Before you start listening to this episode, get yourself a copy of the Attachment Matters digital workbook. You won't regret it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. No matter what time it is, no matter where you are, I am so thankful that you're spending your time with me. Today, in episode 9, I'm going to talk about dismissive attachment. Specifically, this episode will give you a deeper understanding of what dismissive attachment entails, where it comes from, and what you can say, do, and avoid if you or your partner has dismissive attachment. If you're following along in the Attachment Matters digital workbook, we're still on chapter 6. I know that we've been talking for a few months now, but I am just not ready to commit. Sorry. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever said that? Or has someone ever said that to you? An aversion to commitment is just one of the many characteristics of someone with dismissive attachment. In case this is your first episode of the Love Matters podcast that you've listened to, I'd like to give a really short description, a little recap if you've been listening for the last 8 episodes, about how attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance work to create an adult's attachment style. So attachment anxiety is on a continuum. Some people have really low attachment anxiety. Some people have really high attachment anxiety, and most of us fall somewhere in the middle. It is a continuous variable. It is not categorical. It's not either or. And attachment avoidance is the same way. Some people have really low attachment avoidance. Some people have really high attachment avoidance. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle. Again, it is continuous. It's on a continuum. It is not categorical. Attachment avoidance and attachment anxiety, so wherever you fall on that continuum, combine to create 4 adult attachment styles. And so when I talk about these attachment styles, they are extreme examples. So when I talk about secure attachment, I'm talking about someone who scores very low on the anxiety scale and very low on the avoidance scale. When I talk about anxious preoccupied attachment, I'm talking about someone who scores very high on the anxiety scale and very low on the avoidance scale. Someone who is dismissive tends to score very low on the anxiety scale and very high on the avoidance scale. And this should make sense just by the name of the attachment style. It's dismissive. So, a dismissive person doesn't really have that much attachment anxiety, but they have a lot of attachment avoidance. So, they are going to try to avoid certain individuals, certain emotions, certain conversations as much as they can. So let's talk about some of those characteristics of a dismissively attached adult. So, like I said, they tend to experience low anxiety and high avoidance. They typically try to not get too close to other people if they're in a romantic relationship. So, you might hear some dismissive people talk about how much they don't need a relationship or don't want a relationship, like single for life, bachelor for life. I don't need a man to be happy. And so, lots of dismissive people do not seek out romantic relationships. This doesn't mean that a dismissively attached person is never romantically involved, though. In fact, they're frequently romantically involved. But there are some extremely dismissive adults who really don't have many romantic relationships. And let's be clear. They don't have any serious romantic relationships. They might have a significant number of superficial romantic relationships or purely sexual relationships, but they don't have a lot of really serious, deep, emotional, intimate relationships. But that doesn't mean that they can't get in one. If they do get in a romantic relationship, they tend to have some issues with sharing their emotions, talking about difficult topics. So you might be in a relationship with someone and things are moving along and you want to talk about the status of the relationship or maybe even something more serious, like you want to talk about marriage or having children, and they like avoid the conversation like the plague. Yeah, sure, we can talk about that. Yeah, we'll put it off, put it off, put it off. And then they just never have the conversation or anything that would be considered a deep conversation. And depending on how dismissive the person is, some dismissive adults might not be able to have any serious, intimate conversations. And by any, I don't mean they don't talk. It's not like they're mutes and they just sit there in silence. I mean, although that could be the case, they could just be not very talkative. What I mean is they might joke about serious things so that you never get to that serious topic. Or they might say, oh, yeah, let's talk about this later and avoid the conversation. Or they could simply just put up a brick wall instantly. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about it right now. And give no explanation about why or when you want to talk about it. So, dismissively attached adults, when they are in romantic relationships, might not engage in conversations that are too serious, too emotional, too deep, too scary of a topic. And so they're going to avoid a lot of those conversations. And some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, I definitely shut down and I don't want to talk about certain things. Does that mean that I'm dismissive? if you feel like you relate to any of these characteristics, you could have dismissive tendencies or you could have full-blown dismissive attachment. Remember, this is really on a continuum. So some people are going to think, oh yeah, I do A, B, and C, and I guess I must have some dismissive tendencies, but I don't do D through, I don't know, M. And so I guess I'm probably not fully dismissive, where other people are going to listen to the rest of this list and just go check, 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 check. I do all of these things. I must be very dismissive. And so be really careful when you're trying to self-diagnose yourself. But I think that thinking about these things is really important when you're trying to improve your attachment outlook. Okay, so let's get back to some of those characteristics. So dismissively attached adults really crave independence. So they are either going to avoid sharing their life with someone like that independent, right? They don't need a man. They don't want a woman. They don't want to be in a relationship because they don't want to have to share their space or share their lives or have to feel like they're tied down by anyone. So it could be really, really strong like that, where they really crave that much independence. But it could also be that they're in a relationship, but they need their alone time. They need their me time, and they need it more than the average person. So they need to go out with their friends without you a little bit more than the average person, or they want to hang out with their family without you there. And so, or they just want to be alone and just go do stuff by themselves more frequently than the average person. Like, I hope that most people need alone time. I mean, I need alone time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I have dismissive tendencies, but the dismissive adult might need a lot more alone time. So they tend to have a high opinion of themselves and a low opinion of others. So let's unpack that a little bit. I think that this is like, I don't know, it's like a little red flag saying, oh, that's why they are the way they are. So a dismissive person is independent, doesn't really need to get into romantic relationships, and sometimes doesn't even want to. And when they're actually in them, they need some alone time and they don't like to talk about serious or deep things with their romantic partner. It's because they think they're awesome. I'm really awesome. I'm amazing. I'm a good catch. I'm an independent, confident person. They often come across as very confident, which is very appealing to lots of different people. And other people are not so great. So it's difficult for me to trust other people because other people are probably not that good. Other people probably have negative intentions, and other people just are not as good as me. So a dismissive person might have a laundry list of requirements for being in a relationship with them. So I want you to think in your head right now of your checklist. Everybody has this checklist in their head. Some of you don't just have it in your head. You have it written in your notebook. You have it framed on your wall. Things I look for in a romantic partner. You have this idealized version of someone that you want to be with. Think about your list. When I do this activity with my undergraduates at James Madison University, I have them write out their list that they have, their running list that they have in their head on the first day of the semester. And then on the last day of the semester, we go through their list and I encourage them to cross as many things off the list as they think they can, that's really not that important to them anymore after they've learned all about communication in romantic relationships. And what's fascinating to me is that the majority of my students are able to get their 10, 20, 30 item list from the beginning of the semester down to a handful or less items by the end of the semester. A dismissive adult likely has a long list. And they'll say things like, I'm not willing to settle, or in order to date me, you have to have, and they have this long list. This makes it very easy for them to give excuses about why they are not with anyone because there's nobody that's good enough to be in a relationship with them. So they use this list, this long list, to justify why they're single because they have all these requirements that they need. And some of the requirements might be good ones to have, but a lot of them are superficial or insignificant to other people. And they use this list to justify why they're single. So if someone says, "Oh, why aren't you dating anybody?" Well, it's because I haven't ever found anyone that's good enough for me. They put themselves on a pedestal because they have those high positive opinions of themselves. So I'm incredible. I'm up on this pedestal, and no one else can reach me. No one else is good enough to date me, basically. And so this can prolong their independence because they just can't find anyone who is worth their time and energy. Dismissive adults tend to not need another person's approval. And this can be in lots of different situations. So they don't need their partner's approval. They don't seek out family members or friends' approval. They don't really care what strangers think of them because remember, they have those really high opinions of themselves and everyone else is crap. So your opinion doesn't matter to them. So they also tend to not be people pleasers, and that is because of this reason. They don't feel like they need to please anyone because the reason why most people please people is to get their approval, and they don't need that. They're not people pleasers. This doesn't mean that they're unbelievably inconsiderate. We're kind of making them out to sound like assholes, right? And some dismissive people could be assholes, but some secure people could be assholes too. Anyone could be an asshole, really. Dismissive adults tend to make decisions really well and they work well under pressure. This is likely because they have really high confidence and really high self-esteem. They just don't think that they need another person's input. So this can backfire on them too, right? It's great to be able to make decisions and to work well under pressure, but a dismissive adult might make those decisions without consulting other people, which could be offensive to other people. Again, the reason is they think they're awesome. They don't really trust other people, even if they're in a relationship with you. And so they can just make the decision quick and easy. It's this or that, and they choose. Another thing that dismissive adults sometimes do is when they're in a actual relationship, they try to distance themselves either consciously or subconsciously from their partners. They might check out mentally or pull away even when things are going well. So imagine things are going great, you're getting closer, everything seems to be wonderful, you're getting more self-disclosure from one another, and things are just getting to be a little too serious for the dismissive adult, and so they pull away. They could also avoid physical closeness or keep secrets. But something that I think is interesting that a lot of dismissive adults do is they start to focus on imperfections in order to get the relationship to either like de-escalate in seriousness or intimacy or end the relationship. So imagine that you have dismissive attachment and you're in a relationship that is starting to get kind of serious. Well, sometimes people might pull away when things get serious, like I just mentioned, but they could also start to focus on really small things that are wrong with the relationship partner or the relationship as a whole, and then kind of make a mountain out of a molehill, blow it up, and give the other person reason to end the relationship or give themselves reason to end the relationship. I used to have a friend who had pretty serious dismissive tendencies, and she was a serial monogamist. She was very frequently in serious relationships, but at about the 6 to 9 month mark, when, if you've ever been in a relationship for that long, you know that that's where there's this nice little shift where things start to get a lot more comfortable. So around the 6 to 9 month mark, she would come up with some issue in the relationship or with the relationship partner, and then she would either end the relationship over this issue that many of us thought was kind of trivial, or she would raise the stakes in the relationship to make the other person not want to be with her anymore and end the relationship. So she might like act really needy out of the blue just to make the other person end the relationship or give an ultimatum. She would make the ultimatum about something that was kind of, I don't know, not that serious. And then he would have to decide. He's either going to do this thing that she wants him to do that he doesn't want to do, or break up with her. So he would break up with her. And then it would be a month or two, and she'd be back in her next relationship. So she didn't have an unbelievably strong dismissive attachment. She was willing to be in romantic relationships. In fact, she wanted to be in romantic relationships, but she just had a difficult time getting too close to someone. I feel like I might be giving dismissively attached adults a bad rap. I want to be really clear. Dismissive adults tend to look really happy about who they are and where they are in life. They have really high confidence and high self-esteem. This is extremely appealing to other people. They tend to be really social and easygoing and fun to be around. This is not a person who is actually avoidant, who is actually a loner. They tend to have a lot of friends and maybe a lot of sexual partners and maybe a lot of more superficial romantic relationships. They don't tend to be loners. Their independence, their self-esteem, their confidence causes them to not really need a lot of emotional support from other people or reassurance, like I already talked about earlier. But these characteristics also cause them to be approached by people of all kinds of attachment. In episode 8 about anxious attachment, I talked about how anxious, preoccupied adults tend to be pretty motivated to improve themselves. They're really good at self-reflection, at self-awareness for the most part, and they're really motivated to improve their relationships and themselves. They want to, they just have a really hard time doing it. Dismissive adults, though, think that they're fine. They tend to think that they're pretty great already and that they don't really need to change for anyone or that they don't really have any issues. Their confidence and self-esteem is really high. They don't have any issues. There's nothing wrong. I'm perfectly happy in the life that I have created for myself. I don't need to do anything. And so this makes it rather difficult to find people who have dismissive attachment and are willing to talk to me about their dismissive attachment. If you've noticed, I haven't had any of my little interviews that I normally do where somebody tells a story about their own attachment. And the big reason for that is there aren't that many dismissively attached people who want to talk about their dismissive attachment because it would be viewed as a shortcoming, and dismissively attached adults are amazing. I will say though, I have talked to a couple of people who are willing to talk about their past partner's dismissive attachment. Speaking of those people, let's listen to my friend Katerina. She's 22 years old, and she's been in a romantic relationship for the past year. Here, she's talking about one of her past romantic relationships.
So with my past relationship, we were just seeing each other. It wasn't a relationship, but I had thoughts of really liking the person, and I wanted to further a relationship and actually establish, I guess, labels, if you want to call it that. And they were unable to do that. And for me, I saw it as this guy's being a jerk and he's just using me and, emotionally manipulating me. I realized that he just had a lot of issues that he needed to work out himself, but I was just on a different level of commitment that he was not willing to pursue. And so for me, that response felt like there's something wrong with me and that I'm incapable of being in a romantic relationship and this, that, and the other thing.
If you listen to Katerina's story, she is definitely describing someone who has some serious dismissive tendencies. She was ready for commitment. She really liked the person. The other person was maybe pushing away, wasn't ready to commit, didn't want to get physically close or emotionally close. I think it's interesting to hear how that made Katerina feel, though. Instead of thinking, oh, well, this person has an issue, she took it personally at first. I must not be good enough to be in a romantic relationship. And this is often how people take the responses of a dismissive person. So when you're with a dismissive person and they're not ready to commit, or they don't want to talk about emotional things, or they need space and time alone, we frequently will put the blame on ourselves. What am I doing wrong? And I think that part of learning about attachment is really learning that most of our behaviors that are perceived as negative by our romantic relationship partners are about us. They're not about our partners. So let me say that in a different way. Most of the negative relationship behaviors that your partner enacts have nothing to do with you. And they almost always have everything to do with them. I'm going to talk about that idea, the idea of having empathy for another person, in the last episode, episode 12 of season 1 of the Love Matters podcast. So stay tuned for that. Now that you know a lot about what it looks like and what it feels like to have a dismissive attachment style, outlook, or just a few tendencies, let's talk about where it comes from. How do people develop dismissive attachment? If you listened to episode 8, with anxious attachment, parents are typically inconsistent, sometimes being emotionally available, sometimes being unavailable. But parents of dismissives tend to be consistently unavailable. That's the difference here. So attachment anxiety is often created when the parents are inconsistent. They're going back and forth. Sometimes they're there for the child, sometimes they're not. This is very confusing for the child, and it can cause them to have anxiety. They don't know how their primary caregiver is going to react because they react in different ways frequently. But with a dismissively attached adult, their childhood was a bit different. So they knew how their parents were going to react. Their parents were consistently unavailable emotionally. Sometimes the reason for this could be that parents are overwhelmed themselves, or they start to get anxious themselves when their child has big or small emotions, and they just kind of like shut down. When a child is in distress and seeking emotional or physical comfort, they might withdraw themselves emotionally or physically. Um, this response could occur because the parent is unmotivated or unwilling to attend sensitively. So there's one reason why parents might act this way, like they just don't want to. But it could also be because they aren't able to. They don't have the coping skills themselves to deal with emotional upset of other people. And this is likely impacting their other relationships too, not just their relationship with their child. When a child reaches out for support or reassurance, the parent backs off. So they just can't deal with any of it. As emotions get high, the parent retreats even more, and the child starts to feel like the parent has shut the door in their face. Not only are they typically unavailable, but parents who foster dismissive attachment in their children also tend to seriously discourage outward displays of emotion. And this can be everything, like all of the emotions. They don't want their child to yell when they're frustrated, or cry when they're hurt, or scream when they're angry, or get really excited and yell when they're happy, even. So, this idea of not only being unavailable emotionally themselves to help tend to their child when their child is in distress, but they also just need everything to be like calmed down. Like they just want their child to be calm all the time. No yelling when they're happy, no yelling when they're sad, no yelling when they're angry, no yelling ever. Just no raising of their voices or emotions of any kind. And I don't know how many of you listening have children, but my kids are yelling and screaming and making sounds, happy sounds, sad sounds, angry sounds all day long. And I get it. Sometimes it is very overwhelming. And there are many times where we say, okay, we're now having silent dinner because you guys can't chill out during dinner while we're sitting at the dinner table. Or we have, okay, now we're having silent car ride. Everyone has to be quiet in the car. I think that that is not what we're talking about here, right? Every parent gets overwhelmed from time to time and needs there to be some peace and quiet. Um, this is a consistent pattern of being emotionally unavailable and discouraging outward displays of emotions most of the time. Dismissively attached adults often grew up with parents who had unrealistic expectations about the emotional capabilities of children, even of infants. I think that most people understand that infants cry a lot and toddlers whine a lot. But I think that, I mean, even myself, I did not realize just how much crying there would be in my life before I had our twins. I'm a very realistic person, and I did not know how much crying there would be. And I also did not know how much whining there would be. I just thought I don't know what I thought before I had children, but I definitely did not realize the amount of whining that my young children would do and that my older children would do. The biggest whiner in our family is our 8-year-old, not our 5-year-old, our 8-year-old. And he's been going strong for 8 years of solid whining almost all the time that he speaks. Um, our 11-year-old twins, they got through the whining probably around 5. And our 5-year-old, I mean, he just didn't really do that much of it. So every child is different. But my point being that I felt like I had some pretty realistic opinions about what parenthood would be like. And I'm still shocked all the time with the amount and kind of emotional upset that our children go through in their different stages. So I get it. I get where these parents are coming from. But oftentimes they have really unrealistic expectations about the emotional capabilities or the practical independence of young children. So they might think, well, they're supposed to sleep on their own in their own room by 3 months old or 6 months old. Anyone who has children knows that that is possible, but not the norm. That is possible to happen, but it's not the norm. So these unrealistic expectations can be the beginning of this emotional unavailability or this desire to discourage the emotions of their children because they expected it to be one way and it's a different way, and this different way is just too much. It's just overwhelming. So let's talk about some behaviors that could foster a dismissive attachment in babies and children. So a parent or a caregiver who actively suppresses their child's displays of emotion by telling them to grow up or toughen up or stop crying, that's one behavior. A parent or caregiver who routinely refuses to acknowledge their child's cries or shows of distress or fear. So maybe saying things like, oh, this is not a big deal, or there's no reason to be scared of this, or letting a child cry it out. An infant or a toddler or a preschooler cry it out and literally ignoring them while they are upset. A parent or a caregiver who becomes angry or physically separates from a child when they show signs of fear or distress. So they yell at them. So the child is scared or sad, upset in some way, and they yell at them to stop. A parent who shames a child for displaying their emotions, maybe makes fun of them, calls them a crybaby, tells them they're being ridiculous. Again, these are not isolated behaviors. It's not like if you do one of these things, even a handful of times, that your child's attachment is ruined. It is malleable. It's much more malleable than some people would lead you to believe. A dismissive attachment forms after a strong pattern of these behaviors is created. You've listened to all these descriptions and you believe that you have some kind of dismissive attachment. Maybe you feel like you have some dismissive tendencies that have hurt your relationships in the past, or you think you have full-blown dismissive attachment style. I'm going to talk to you now about some things that I think you can do, say, and avoid if you have dismissive attachment yourself. The first thing in the things I think you can do is educate yourself about dismissive attachment. I plan to post a link to a book about dismissive attachment in the show notes of this episode. There is so much information out there about attachment in adulthood, and especially very individualized information about specific attachment styles. So educate yourself about your dismissive attachment. Go out of your way to do special things for your partner when you have a partner. Actively pay attention to how your partner feels loved by other people. Think about how they prefer to be loved and try to express love that way. So you have to really pay attention to your partner and become in tune with them. That's part of being in a healthy, mature relationship. So make sure that you are making a conscious effort to do that. Invite your partner to hang out with you and your friends and family. Don't completely exclude your partner from other parts of your life. I get it if you need alone time with your friends or alone time with your mom or your dad or your brothers or your sister. You just need to be away or you just need alone time with yourself. I get that. But you're going to have to let your partner come into those parts of your lives. They don't need to come all the time, but at least sometimes. Making a big deal out of special occasions is also important, and carving quality time out of your daily schedule for your partner is vital. So, this doesn't have to be face to face time, but whenever you're thinking about your partner, send them a text, call them, have some kind of communication or interaction with them every single day, whether it is texting or calling someone or face to face. You need to make sure that you carve out quality communication time with your partner every day. You also are going to need to work on being more self aware and reflecting on your past experiences. Think about how your past has molded you to the person that you are today with your desires for autonomy. Think carefully about why you tend to avoid emotional and or physical closeness. What happened in your past that's made you have these dismissive tendencies or dismissive attachment? Like I said earlier, there are lots of things that parents do that cause dismissive attachment in their children. And you might have been listening to that section of this episode and thought, "Oh yeah, that's where this came from. Yeah, I see." That's like describing my parents to a T. And if that's the case, I think that's actually great that you now know where the cause of some of your dismissive tendencies have come from. But some of you might have been listening and you thought, no, my parents weren't like that at all. I don't understand. I want to remind you several episodes ago when I talked about negative childhood experiences that can change or add on top of our attachment foundation that's developed in those first few years of life with our parents. There are lots of things that can impact one's attachment. And so it might not be that your parents were the cause of your dismissive tendencies or dismissive attachment. It could have been other childhood experiences. So, other negative life events that you experienced, or other romantic relationships or friendships that you experienced that maybe didn't go so well, that added some dismissive tendencies to your attachment outlook. I'm going to talk about that in much more detail in the last episode of this season. And so pay attention for that. But I think it's really important to be reflective and be self aware whenever we're trying to improve ourselves or improve our romantic relationships. So let's talk about some things that you can say if you have dismissive attachment. So, a few things that you should really work towards adding to your routine communication patterns. First, express your difficulties with sharing your emotions. You could say something like, "It's hard for me to talk about my feelings," and explain why it's difficult for you. You've done a lot of self reflecting, hopefully, at this point. Tell your partner, tell them why it's difficult for you. Express your difficulties talking about commitment in the future. You could say something like, "It's hard for me to talk about our future because commitment makes me really uncomfortable." and then explain why this is difficult for you. A third thing you can do is communicate your relationship likes and dislikes. A fourth thing is to tell your partner that you care about them. This is really important, and it's often doesn't come naturally to someone with dismissive attachment. And so you're going to have to work at this. Tell your partner frequently how much you love them, how much you appreciate them, how much you care about them. A fifth thing you can do is to express your dislike with being pressured to share your own emotions. You could say something like, I usually shut down when I feel pressured to talk about stuff I'm not ready to talk about yet. Please be patient with me. I don't move as fast in relationships as most people. Those are some really great things that you can say when you're in a relationship with someone if you have dismissive tendencies or dismissive attachment. Here are some things I think you should avoid. Getting frustrated with your partner's bids for affection, which is pretty easy when you have dismissive attachment. You get, annoyed sometimes by the physical and emotional toll that your partner is taking on you. And so work hard towards not getting frustrated with your partner's bids for affection. Avoid arguing defensively. Avoid brushing off your partner. Avoid thinking you're always right. There's that high self-esteem that you have, and you think that lots of things that you say and do are right, and lots of things that other people say and do are not right. You're not always right. No one is. Avoid putting up walls when discussing difficult topics. I know this is hard, but you have to work really hard at not doing this. And avoid acting like you don't care about your partner. This is easier said than done because sometimes a dismissively attached adult doesn't know that they're making their partner feel like they don't care about them. So ask your partner, do you feel loved by me? I love you. I care about you. I need you to know that. And make sure that you're increasing, even though it's difficult, that you're increasing communication about your emotions with your partner. But let's say it's not you who has dismissive attachment. What if your partner has a dismissive attachment style or dismissive tendencies? Well, here are some things that you can do, say, and avoid if your partner has dismissive attachment. As always, I think that you should educate yourself about dismissive attachment. You also should be patient. Take it slow, emotionally, physically, and conversationally. Give your partner space and alone time when they need it. Let them hang out with their friends or family alone sometimes. Give them time to have their own hobbies and interests while still playing a role in their life. There's a fine line here, and you're going to have to figure it out. The fine line is different with different people, and you're going to have to become really in tune with your partner to try to figure out where that line is. Let them guide the pace of the relationship. Minimize your own emotional disclosure to match the disclosures of your partner. This can be really hard, especially if your partner is very dismissive, but this is a way to show your partner that you care about them and you're not trying to push them, because the pushing is what makes them go into shutdown mode. So we don't want that. You need to pay attention to the amount of disclosure your partner can handle and then meet them there. Meet them where they're at. Understand that your partner might need less quality time together than what you're used to. And know that it has little to do with you and your relationship. Try not to take it personally if your partner needs alone time. This is tricky and this is difficult. But some people need less quality time together than other people. And if the person is worth it, if you really care about this person, you really want to see where this relationship can move forward, where it's going to go, then you should be willing to do these things for your dismissively attached partner. So what are some things you can say? Well, I have 6 things that you can say. First, you can express your compatibility. Say things like, I love us. I love us. I love everything about us. Second, reassure safety and security. I'm not going to judge you. You can tell me anything. You don't have to feel scared with me. Third, express your understanding. I get that you have a hard time trusting others. You can trust me. I'm here for you when you're ready. So you're not pushing them to disclose. You're not pushing them to share. You are saying, I'm here for you when you're ready. Fourth, walk the line between pushing for disclosure while not prying or smothering. And again, this is a very hard line to walk on, but you're going to have to figure out how to do it. Fifth, reinforce your support of their independence. Of course, you can go hang out with your friends, have fun. And sixth, use I messages. I messages are an assertion about the feelings, beliefs, and values of the person speaking, especially during conflict. So you say something like, I feel hurt when people I deeply care about don't share their lives with me. So it's okay to say something, that's going to tell them your own feelings. Like, of course, you can express your own feelings, but I think you need to just understand the feelings of their partner and the perspective of your partner. So here's some things you should avoid. Avoid bombarding your partner or nagging them for emotional disclosure. This is a bit of a deal breaker for a dismissively attached adult. Avoid being too distant. You still want to be close physically and emotionally, but just be careful not to smother. Avoid using destructive conflict strategies such as accusatory language, disrespect, contempt, which is like making fun of them or mocking them, stonewalling, giving them the silent treatment, criticism, shaming, blaming, and defensiveness. And the last thing you should do is avoid blaming them or yourself for their distant or negative behaviors. Dismissive attachment can be difficult to cope with. It can be difficult for the person who has dismissive attachment, and it can be difficult for the person who's dating the person who has dismissive attachment. But there is hope, just like there is with all insecure attachment styles. You can become more secure. You can earn banked security. You just have to be willing to do the work. And if you are dating someone with dismissive attachment, you just have to be willing to be patient. Thank you all so much for joining me for episode 9 of season 1 of the Love Matters podcast. If you're following along in the Attachment Matters digital workbook, this episode went over information from chapter 6. I'd like to give a special thanks to my contributor in this episode, Katerina. Again, I am your host, Dr. Jenny Rosier, and as always, you can find me on Instagram at Relationships Love Happiness, on Facebook and YouTube by searching for the Relationships Love Happiness Project, and on the web at www.relationshipslovehappiness.com. I hope you'll join me for episode 10, where I plan to talk about fearful avoidant or disorganized adult attachment. Thanks for listening.